But it's really nice that we've got, that we've brought Beveridge here into the MAK, isn't it? This kind of 1950s August. Normally I show a picture of Beveridge and a picture of Freud. So we've seen Sigmund's chair, and then we can say that, you know, this was the sort of political pattern of how our welfare system should be. And then we've kind of written our own version here, and this is sort of the design pattern, isn't it? The kind of principles of how we could design things. But Jennie, I don't know, you're more used to thinking about this as a designer and kind of like how these principles can be used, I think, in this is our Beveridge 4.0.
Yes, of course, because we have to, it's not enough to have the principles.
No.
You have to then think, how do they manifest in the built environment, in interactions between people, in communications, in how the systems work together. So thinking about the projects that we have done, or the areas of the welfare state that we've tackled, and how those principles have played out and held true in all of that, it's very satisfying. Because of course our work is always an ongoing experiment, isn't it?
That's right.
We think this is the right pattern for the new welfare state. We keep trying it out in different areas and learning what works and what doesn't work.
That's right. But also that's the thing about Beveridge himself, isn't it? Because he said that he'd left out people and he'd left out communities, and that's kind of where our work begins. And I guess that's kind of the role of the museum, of like how we bring in different people and we begin to think, and that's what we're trying to do, is bring the public all the time into beginning to kind of reimagine the systems, and then kind of design gives us the tools to do that. So that would be the other thing that, you know, we're always talking about, how you have to kind of, like, how we can use design and design thinking to reframe the problem. Because one of our critiques is, isn't it, that everybody is trying to do welfare reform from the institution. Like, how can the hospital be more efficient? But we know that, you know, the hospital was for infectious diseases. Now everybody has chronic diseases, diabetes, obesity, these big social problems. Like, we need to start, again, it's from people, it's not from kind of like how we reform the institution. I don't know what that means about the museum though, because it frightens me, the idea that we'd say, let's not have the museum. You know, that's back to kind of where is formal knowledge, and how do we bring that in, and how do we mix it in a different way with vernacular and people's thoughts and feelings.
It's true.
We don't want to lose hands.
No, because I mean, in a way, what a museum does is it puts the current feeling in the context of, you know, where that has come from, and that's also important to. It is also important to our work to think, you know, why is it that people are expressing an emotional desire for something right now? Is it a result of what's happened before, or is it in a reaction to what they see coming next?
Do you mean, why do we have this thing that we must reinvent our services, for instance? Where's that feeling coming from? Yeah. You don't think it's just a complete frustration that things don't work?
No, I think right now, I don't know, when I have these conversations with people and really work with them, there is an unarticulated desire for something different to what they have right now. And of course you can't get at that unless you're using visual tools and kind of putting things in front of them that untap their sort of those latent thoughts and needs.
I also think that's really interesting, because our work is all about collaboration, isn't it? And you know, the biggest question people ask, sort of people in power ask, is, it will never work, people will never participate, people will never collaborate. Because of course nobody wants to collaborate with old systems, do they? Because they're not designed for participation.
No, they're designed to keep you out, largely.
Exactly.
Ration access to them.
Yeah. So I mean, that being one of our principles is like, how can you design something that everybody can come into?
Exactly, and I think because we want to build systems that actually get stronger the more people that use them, not ones that are, you know, present people as a burden on the state's resources. And of course, if you're doing that, that's all about behaviour change, and it's all about how you build something that really resonates with people, so they see their place in it and they want to participate. And I mean, that's, in a way, that's quite a classic design goal. You know, build the thing that people actually want.
Yes.
They actually want it, and they aspire to it and want to be part of it.
But also, I mean, but the idea of this museum also is that build something that is collective, isn't it? And that, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to kind of to bring back. I mean, one of the things we could talk about is the role of technology, about how design has changed technology, and also, I mean, I often say about our work that our work was, lots of things we do were conceived in the 1970s, but we couldn't keep those communities together until we had technology to keep them together. So maybe there's kind of the 19th century collective, the 20th century individual, and now in the 21st century we're kind of back to some idea of a design collective. I don't know. But the transitional object is really important, I think, because of course this is kind of originally a psychoanalytic idea of like how people can emotionally give up something they're attached to and move into a new system. And I definitely think we know that if we give people physical objects, and actually on our team as much as people we're working with, because our work is very freeform, and we know that that kind of panics people, doesn't it? That there is, traditional public services have a traditional script. I feel safe because I'm meeting you and I don't even have to look at you. I can keep my eyes down and I can fill out the form and I can interact with you. And so to stop me doing that, you have to give me something different to kind of give me the confidence to behave in a different way.
I suppose I think that we have some objects that do that. So some of the tools that we use in the work become transitional objects because they do put the power in the hands of people themselves rather than the professionals. And I think that many of the transitional things in our work are actually, they're the ways in which we organise people, or they're the roles that we give people to take on. So I was thinking about the work that we did around exercise years ago. So how can you help people exercise more? And simply by putting them in groups where they can invite a personal trainer in, or I don't know, a badminton coach, or into their group, made it possible for them to do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise, rather than them having to go to a gym or an exercise class where they have to fit in with what's happening there.
Well, that's
so even having that kind of form sort of put them in a different story where they are being the conductors of what happens in their lives. And I think we do that quite a lot, give people a different identity and a different form to organise themselves in, and then that becomes the transition.
That's right, rather than the kind of object itself. But also the object is very important at a policy level as well, don't you think? I mean, if we think about the prison, you know, that we were trying to say, we want to completely invert the idea of a prison. You know, we want to kind of spend everything that is spent on the physical structure. We want to build a cheap physical structure that's effective, so we can spend all of that on actually giving people an opportunity to change their lives. And people only believed it was possible because they saw a model. And even though the model itself is never going to get you anywhere, suddenly it made people think, oh, this isn't a pamphlet on a piece of paper. These people are really going to, they're going to transform the prison service. Of course, it's the only project that we haven't actually realised. But nonetheless, that kind of model enabled us to kind of talk to politicians, the heads of the prison service, because gosh, okay, this is a different way of thinking about things. This is immediately moving on in my head. What is the realm of possibility?
And of course, in that way, you're making something very abstract and conceptual, very tangible. And in a physical sense, then people can locate themselves in it differently, which is, of course, how we think about the reason why design work and visual work is so much more democratic than a kind of verbal debate, because if you have something visual there on the table in front of you, there's much less interpretation and misunderstandings that can happen, and your experience of that as a lay person and your experience of that as a professional person are much more equal.
Although there is an idea of beauty and in our work, I think, isn't there? And, you know, and like the school work I did very much started from that. Like, why? Because beauty doesn't cost more. Like, why must there be this? You know, and that's what's so inspiring about the idea of the exemplar in a museum. It's like saying to everybody, okay, you're going to have a plate. It can be a beautiful plate. It doesn't need to be, you know, whatever beauty is for you, it can be. And that is something that we definitely lost in the sort of 1950s identikit of our services, and we're kind of trying to bring in, I think, that is like an intrinsically important.
Because people in their lives, when they interact with some of the services we're creating, there's an ugliness and a difficulty in their lives, and to be able to give them something to be part of that brings some kind of beauty and joy into that is really important. It's also about the elegance of the solutions. So not just beauty, but elegance in the way that things are constructed. And how resources are used differently.
Yeah, because one of the things that we've really learned through that more and more is that actually we're kind of trying to design or curate relationships,
Yes.
aren't we? And that, in the beginning we just knew that we needed to move away from meeting people's needs to kind of thinking about what capabilities you need, and then the relationship has become so important. And this reminds me of when we were working in a school at Kingsdale in London, at that time one of the sort of most difficult schools in London. And one day what we did was we just set, the dinner queue was the site of the most bullying. So one day we just set all the tables with cloths and we put flowers on the table and we put knives and forks, and the children came in and they were like, is this for us? Surely this can't be for us, because how could we have made that for them? And then everybody sat down, ate completely beautifully, of course, because we had made it beautiful, and of course people responded to that. And really interesting conversations started through that, just kind of the idea of value. It's just so important, I think, in what we're doing.
Very important. That made me think about reciprocity, because I think that is a transitional tool in the relationship work that we do. So we know that the systems we create work much better if there is reciprocity between the people who are receiving a service and the people who are giving the service.
Yes.
So we see it with our families' work, where they've been battered by the system for so long that they feel completely hopeless and useless and like they've got nothing to contribute. And just having the teams that we have work with them say, this is how you have changed my family life, was an extraordinary kind of opening of a different kind of relationship.
Yes. So how could we collect our work? I mean, it's so experiential.
And how can we be curated? Who can curate us for posterity?
But I don't know, I think it's much more like dance notation, isn't it? I mean, when the dance isn't being performed, it isn't there, but somewhere there is a notation, and you can see, from sort of Balanchine and then, progressing to kind of, I don't know, whoever today, whatever, the idea's gone, but somehow we need some kind of notation. Partly because we've made so many mistakes, we're learning all the time. So actually I think curating is important, because you see, well, let's not repeat this. We did this bit worked. Our process, our process has changed a lot.
But I think also, I mean, of course, service designers try to create blueprints of the services that they create. And to some degree, they do capture the intention and the major actions. But what's missing from that, of course, is the stories that people feel as they're taking part in it. So it may be that we can collect the narratives of people as they have gone through our services and how their lives have changed as a result of that, and that somehow captures some of the spirit of what we're trying to
I think
achieve.
It would be really important to have a sort of documentary process like that. That we have our pattern book we've discussed, but which we can preserve. But I do think kind of documentary process of how the work grows is really important. Partly because it sort of brings together kind of ethnography, history, and the kind of traditional role of design. It's a social history of design as well, isn't it? When we see the way, in 100 years, the Swindon sitting room of how people lived then compared to how people live now is important, I think. And the role of technology within that would be really important. So maybe it's kind of video installations on one level is at least capturing some of the emotion and the energy. But I would like to think that it could be curated in here as a happening, that once a month people come in, we can host a tea party for everybody over 50 in Vienna, or we can, because it's through that process as well, that just like you can restage the Balanchine dance, we can, learn some of those things again.
But of course we would like to package up our thinking and have it be replicated by many people who are not us. So how are we
but that's so interesting, isn't it? Because when the MAK started, it was right next to the School of Art, and now there's been this bifurcation. But of course what we want is the modern Bauhaus. I mean, really, my dream would be to kind of turn Participle into that very, very modern design school, which would be very interdisciplinary, very experiential, and bring together kind of different forms of archival knowledge, just as we saw with Hans, as well as that kind of very, very practical experience. And I guess that would be a very living museum, but that would be what I would like to see as the kind of next phase of our work. But I think the very exciting thing about it is that you know, that one of the kind of things underlying our work and back to kind of, you know, being nominated as the designer of the year or whatever in the UK is that the world has enough things, but this is an incredible skill set that we're now going to use to kind of problem solve. And one of the things that really excites me is the amount of mail I get from young designers, because I see people coming through design schools now, they want to apply those skills to changing the world. I think one of the problems in there might be that actually the education might not fit them. And it's interesting to think who are the designers that at Participle kind of, they're not from social design, they're from more traditional design fields. They're a bit more misfit maybe, but they're also, I would see them as T-shaped people because their ability to connect to and really understand a world of politics or a world of economics is just as important actually as the design training, don't you think?
I think so. I mean, I think it's great that people want to move into this field, and I think it actually reflects a much wider desire by a younger generation to make change in their careers, to create value in their careers, not just to accept what the status quo is, and make a social contribution. So I think those two things are coming together and meaning that we do have this new generation of designers. And to some extent it's like they're the new designer makers, because we see that if they can't, they graduate from these sort of social design courses, if they can't find a place to work in, you know, these big systems that we have, they just create their own things, their own social interventions and innovations, and that's very exciting.
But they're very conceptual. And that's what's so interesting about this exhibition as well. It's not about the concept, it's about the exemplar.
Yes.
And for me that's a very different, because the exemplar is actually an example, it's a physical thing changing a system.
Yes.
And you see, I think why we're so lucky is that we are working in a way where we're setting our own problems and we're solving them. So we're not trying to we're not trying to kind of make a system better. We're not kind of, and I think that's the challenge for social design, isn't it? It's going into the existing system and trying to fix it, but actually the system cannot be fixed. We need to be over here.
This is my huge frustration with most of the activity that happens out there, is that it's about improving the kinds of systems and processes that are fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, which brings us back to Beveridge. I mean, he recognised this himself at the end of his life, that it was over.
Yes. And of course, what is that? Is that a lack of ambition, or is it a lack of recognition?
Yes.
And of course, that's where you're thinking that, okay, we can learn these social design tools, but unless you have an inherent critique of the thing you're trying to change, or a vision of how the world needs to be different, then of course you're not applying those skills in a way that is genuinely transformational.
Yeah, so maybe social design doesn't have its pattern book yet. Maybe that's the problem with it.